Good afternoon. I'm Rosemary Alleyne. Welcome to our panel discussion, From Independence to Republic. We're so glad to have you. I'm sure we'll have a very interesting, interactive talk this afternoon about things that are important to us here at the home of independence. And my panel this afternoon, I have Dr. Dawn Marie Armstrong. She is a sports exercise psychologist. She is the candidate for St. Michael North, and she's also a former athlete. Welcome, Dr. Dawn Marie. Next to her is Robert Bobby Morris, a face well known to most of us. He is a political historian, a former member of Parliament for Christchurch East Central. He's also a trade unionist, and he was at one time an international observer for the Commonwealth in the elections in Pakistan and Southern Africa. And I'm sure I could say so much more about our friend we call Bobby. Welcome, Mr. Morris.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
And next to him, I have a handsome young man, Corey Greenidge. He's an attorney at law. He's a candidate for Christchurch South, and he practices corporate international law. He also taught constitutional law at the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus, and it's always good to see young people like Dr. Dawn Marie and Mr. Greenidge here at the home where independence was birthed and started. Welcome.
Thank you.
So now we can get into our discussion. I really want to start with Bobby Morris, to put everything in context for our generation and for the younger generation, this whole concept of independence, how it started, who were the major players, and why it should be so important to us as a landmark to always celebrate Barbados's independence.
Thank you very much, Rose. I think I would put it in the context of decolonization. And quite frankly, when we were talking about moving from independence to Republican status, we were talking about constitutional decolonization. But we need to understand that there is a much wider view that must be taken about decolonization, because if you just move your constitution, but you still keep the same morals, the same behaviors, and so on, if you are not freeing yourself culturally, because there has to be cultural decolonization. And of course, Earl understood that. So even as he went to independence, he set up something like crop over and Carifta, etc., because he understood that we had to move from the English culture of entertainment and so on to the Barbadian culture. So we can carry that through a whole range of things. So we're talking about decolonization, and decolonization of the mind. So that looking at constitutional decolonization, it meant that we have to go back to the time when we started to become the whole process, then we started the process of independence. We had to start with things like giving the vote to people who were black or colored. And that goes back to the 19th century. So that is the start of that. That your origin, in terms of racial origin, should not be a determinant of whether you should vote or not. And that was, of course, a man like Samuel Jackson Presley was the first person, the first colored person. Secondo Ruiz was the kind of person who got into the lead. The next thing was making sure that the vote was not held for men alone, because that was a very dominant thing. You had to make sure that the women got the women franchise. So you started that kind of decolonization coming through, and then you had to look at the assembly. How would the assembly be structured? So remember, we came up in the British system. We had borrowed the British system, and for years we had what is known as Crown Colony government, the Crown control. Basically, we sent the governor down here, but the whole control was external. So we had now to transfer that system to where we are responsible for our own. And that comes into the time of Duncan O'Neill, Henry Walter Reese, we are talking about Grant Adams, right away down the line. And then, of course, I'm truncating to some extent because of the time, but when Barr came, he said, look, we want to go another step forward. That is something called independence. But remember, in 1652, there was a treaty signed in Austin on the 17th of January of that year, which said that we were independent. A treaty was signed in Oyster Bay, and it was never reversed. And actually, that is including the first chapter of the Constitution of Barbados. And Earl Barr put it there so that people can understand that we did have that a long time ago, but then we lost that because we did not embrace it. So it meant that now Earl Barr had to go further than constitutional decolonization. Of course, he went up to England and he started the process where we would delink from the British government. This was the major step. But where he had to stop, basically, was at the stage where he did not get support from other political parties in terms of making the total break into Republican status. And therefore he had to satisfy himself with independence. Because believe me, the two parties that were definitely opposed to it would have been the Barbados Labour Party, and at that time there was a party of some white people in Barbados, a fairly strong, what they would call conservative party. Those were the two very important groups, etc., that did not give the support that was necessary. And Barr was able to secure independence because a few white men in the Senate backed him. But there was no support from the other political parties to go independence, far as to go to the next stage of the republic. So I would say very briefly that now the constitutional changes that are coming about, and it seems to me that the Prime Minister is saying, if I'm reading it correctly, in terms of the person in charge of the committee that was established, he's saying that the Prime Minister and the others took the documents that were sent to them with the recommendations, but he doesn't know what is happening there. And he's sort of complaining in terms of Mr. Blackman. He's sort of complaining in terms of, look, I sent these proposals in, and I've not heard further from that. So it seems to me now that government is looking at those proposals perhaps to cherry pick what they want and then to introduce. And it's easy for them because they have total control. So unless there's some kind of group like ours that might challenge them, whatever they want to put in that constitution will become the constitution for tomorrow. But I stop at that point, because as I said, what we're talking about is decolonization, and it means that you want to move as far as possible away from where you were in the status of being a colonial. You want to be independent, you want to be able to establish your own identity in all the different ways and so on. So I pause at that point.
I'm glad you paused at that point. There was something you said that piqued my interest. You said that when Mr. Barrow went to the British for independence, his objective might have been at that time Republican status, but he could not get that at the time. So he settled for independence. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's one thing. Yeah.
So this road to republicanism is not something that started 3 years ago or 4 years ago. It started almost 60 years ago.
Of course.
Good. That was my point. Now, you talked about the constitutional changes that are happening now that are proposed, and I want to hear from Mr. Greenidge something about that, because people seem to be confused about all that is going on, what's happening with our constitution. So could you please?
Certainly. Again, good afternoon to the panel and to our audience. I will just go back from 1966 and forward with respect to our constitution. And the way our constitution came into being is that in 1966, once Harold Barrow went to the the British Parliament. A law was actually passed in the British Parliament, which was the Independence Order, the grant of Barbados' independence. Attached or a schedule to that independence order would have been the Constitution, which set the supreme law of the nation in 1966. And for Barbadians to understand, I say supreme law because all other laws that are made thereafter, maybe with the exception of the savings clauses within the order, must be subordinate to the Constitution. So when you have the Bill of Rights and you have all of the institutions of government, those all function under the Constitution, and any law that comes thereafter has to be subordinate. To the extent that if there's a law that is contrary to what is in the Constitution, it could be vitiated based on its difference in Constitution. It cannot exist outside of the umbrella of the Constitution. You fast forward now to what happened in 2021. And there was some legal debate as to if you can repeal the independence order. So you had the Constitutional Amendment Bill in 2021, which essentially repealed the independence order from 1996. And there was some legal debate as if you can repeal the independence order and save a schedule, which was the Constitution, to the independence order. We fell on the side of that you can save the schedule. So we saved the Constitution such that the existing Constitution that was attached to the independence order remained the Constitution of Barbados as we crossed the Rubicon into Republicanism, into the Republic. What the Constitutional Amendment Bill at the time then removed, as you would understand, the Queen as the head of state and replaced the head of state then with our local, at the time, well, the president at the time. So no longer, we would grow up in school, all of us would know that the Governor General was the head of state, and the Governor General represented the Queen or the monarch of England, the king, would represent, that would be the head of state in Barbados. But the Constitutional Amendment removed that head of state, that connection to England, and then we installed our president, who is now the head of state. As we move forward through republicanism, there's a lot of discussion in the public forum as to if, one, does the Constitution, do we have a Constitution? Simple question, do we have a Constitution? And the simple answer is yes, there is a Constitution. What I think fuels the debate now is whether the construct, the legal and the governance constructs that are within the Constitution as it exists now, if those are still relevant for republicanism, or do they still reflect the post-republicanism era? Do they still reflect the colonial age, as it were? So when you hear a lot of discussion, we need a Republican Constitution. The context of that is not just changing a document. What you're really asking is if the construct or the framework of our existing Constitution is able to support what we're trying to achieve now as a republic. Do we retain the exact structures? Do we retain the Westminster system of governance? Do we retain a ceremonial president as opposed to an executive president? So there are a lot of questions that are raised, and then what is really the umbrella of that is whether the existing Constitution and its structure and its institutions support a move towards republicanism, and that debate continues. What is happening now, and I'll end here, is that we're seeing what in effect is a bit of a piecemeal approach to changes to the Constitution. For example, the bill that was passed in the House last week, which now removed the Speaker of the House from being an elected member of Parliament to being appointed then, is a fundamental change. But these are changes that are happening piecemeal. And some of the schools of thought is we need a full reform, not just at the parliamentary level, but also at the constitutional level. So that kind of brings us into the area which we are in right now.
Thank you very much, and I'll let Dr. Armstrong speak to this whole issue. And I ask you this as probably one of the younger people in the group, and before, as I was preparing to do this panel discussion, I was talking to some young people, And I was asking them, what does independence mean to you?
Yeah.
And they could not articulate it. They couldn't tell me. It meant nothing to them.
Yeah.
So as a young person and listening to Mr. Morris and your colleague, Mr. Greenidge, what do you think about that? That sense of, it's not important.
Aloofness. I'd say that, honestly, a lot of the constitutional jargon and political jargon sometimes goes over the heads of the younger generation. And I think, being what persons would call a millennial, a lot of what we know now was heavily taught in schools. So I learned a lot of my knowledge about independence from general studies in primary school, which kind of developed into social studies in secondary school. And it was often mandated that we understood, this historical development of our country. When we considered history then at the CSEC level and Caribbean studies at CAPE, there was this continuum and just this level of, development, structural development in terms of my learning. But I do feel as if somehow I feel we've lost a connection. This is with the government and that education. And when I was much younger, you used to have programs. At a time like this, you would see, Arrow Barrow being featured throughout the course of November. We've often said that it feels as if they're trying to, eliminate the contribution that this party and Arrow Barrow himself has made to the development of Barbados. And independence is something I think that every young person, from the time you are able to read and write, is something that we should know. Yes, the Republic and the road to the Republic was important. I think in the minds of many, it was much more of a celebration and a celebration of who brought us into the Republic, but still not a real understanding of what that could be. So I definitely do feel it is the GIS's mission at this point in time. We've got lots of different mediums, infographics, different ways of tailoring our message and making it more appropriate to the lay person to understand exactly what this may mean. I could go out and say what it means to me and what the Democratic Labour Party has done for the country and what independence has done for us as a people, and people understand that, but it's about shaping that message so that everyone understands exactly why these discussions are important and why discussions on the Constitution are critical to us and our survival as a people right now as it stands.
And I'm glad you talked about that because Mr. Greenidge, you talked about having a constitution that reflects republicanism and the piecemeal approach that government is apparently taking to this project. And I know that you said that just last week a change was made to the existing constitution to reflect a little piece of republicanism with how the speaker is elected or appointed. And how can we make Barbadians see, and this question can go to all of you, that there is a need for really public conversations, public education. I don't know if you want to call it civics in schools, just like Dr. Armstrong said, for people to understand that these changes, this road to republicanism which we are on, it will impact and affect their lives.
I will start by dovetailing from Dr. Armstrong to say this. Any attempt to use republicanism to erase the impact of independence, I think should be halted immediately. Independence is, to say it was a milestone in the history of Barbados would be an understatement. Independence, if you, as a child, I remember the imagery, and not that I was born at the time, but I remember the imagery in later years of the downpour of rain over Garrison Savannah, and that Union Jack falling, and the broken trident being lifted in the air at midnight in the pouring rain, is something that, regardless of our continued history or continued path, there should be no government that should be trying to erase any part of that history. And I would leave most of the history to my colleague, Dr. Morris, but I just wanted to establish that we can continue Barbados's path without trying to erase any of its storied history. But this is people, Barbadians, thousands of them, standing in the rain with a sense of pride and a sense of you know, just patriotism to understand that Barbados had just come of age. That said, to go to your question, therefore, the education of our Barbadian people, those that would be old enough to have lived through independence, those that would have been old enough to maybe not born then, but certainly it was part of their early schooling, and even younger now, education should include all of that and the road that we've taken. And even now in this dispensation, as changes are being made, there should be a public education to understand what those changes mean, how they will affect our lives, how do they affect our governance, how do we transition to the extent that we do not lose our independent identity, but that we continue to understand that this is still a democracy that is vibrant and that it takes care of all Barbadians. So I do agree with you. Any notion of simply trying to make changes and erase what is our history, to me is tantamount to heresy, personally. And I think any attempt to do that should be rejected, not only by the political class, but any Barbadian who is a proud patriot and understands where Barbados has come from.
In my view, quite frankly, there is not a huge difference between what we achieved in going to independence and going to Republican status. We were already at the top of the hill, quite frankly. So there was no large amount of space to cover. Ask any Barbadian what it means to them since we've moved from independence to Republican status. How has it touched them? How has it impacted them? There was nowhere to go, basically. And in fact, all that stopped Barbados from going there was that he did not get the support that he wanted. Because the other side was intent that the only way that they wanted to go to independence was within a federal structure. Mm-hmm. And federation just would not cut it at that time. Because once Mali and others got the right from the British government to go independent, they went in that direction. They forgot the whole concept of federation. So Barbados and all of us, illiterate and so on, also disappeared. And the only option that Bar and others were faced with was to go independent and to go Republican. But they said they did not get the support to go Republican. So they had to satisfy themselves with what they can do. So now that we are a republic, the question is, what do we see ourselves doing to reflect that Republican status? I want to look at a particular aspect of Republican status. Unfortunately, if you have done Latin American and Caribbean history, one of the things that you fear about Republican status is that leaders become very autocratic. Leaders become maximum leaders. Leaders move away from things that what I call democratic socialism, and they go into really a kind of conservative mode. They mask it, but a conservative mode of operation. And I'm quite afraid that that is the historical path that we are moving on in Barbados right now. I am seeing a reversal of the socialist structure. And they're starting now, as we speak, they're talking about transport. When you privatize transport, transport is one of the major economic structures in our country. It really is the basis of work. People get into work. And therefore, turning the wheels of government. And when you put that in the hands of businessmen, When you start selling the buses, I'm not afraid to say, it started with certain people who came from the Indian continent here. And from way back, they started getting licenses and so on. And might start with what is called minibus, etc. But now they have the opportunity. Now understand that transport is very important in your entire economy, because most of your people have to get to work through that transport. So once you understand that once you give that over from the government and you privatize transport, then you are doing a number of things to the economy. You're going sometimes to send it the whole cost of living. You're going to send it, and one of the things we do is make it very hard for the people who are working in that transport system to get a good wage, a good salary, etc. So it's going to be impacting people in a significant way, and they will then concentrate too on the routes that they find beneficial. If they find that routes are not beneficial, they will close them down. We have been there before. We had all kinds of minibuses, and then when I was a boy, you had the Rockland bus and the Elite bus company, etc. We had those. So we moved from that, and we moved into a public transport system run by the government. And if we move out of that now and we privatize it completely, we can expect the same problem that we had before. So I think one of the things we have to look at now is the impact of Republican states, what's going to go here now, and what is the role of government in making sure that they can manage the system that the majority of people are still to benefit. Because right now, quite frankly, there might be a push to the private sector to do almost everything. That can easily happen. That the private sector is given control of several aspects of the economy. It can happen gradually. If you're not watching, all of a sudden it will slip away. And you'll find that you're back to the pre-independence period, where you had that same problem of a small group of people because of their wealth. The further problem is that the small group of people who might be controlling might not only be Barbadians, but there might be external actors, because capital moves, and people who have more capital than other capital can move and take over. So I think that is something that we have to watch. The other thing I want to speak about is the question of leadership. I have found that in the development of Caribbean and Latin America, from a historical position, when we move to the Republican status, sometimes the democracy that we treasure so much changes. And what you get is the maximum leader. It's happened seriously in Latin America. And I thought I was seeing signals of the maximum leader, say I call some names, Mr. Gonzalez, quite frankly. And I think I'm seeing some signals of the maximum leader in Barbados too. I think I'm seeing those signals. And it's concerning to me, quite frankly, and I think this party has to speak on these issues. I think it has not to be afraid to say, well, this is not what we want. We don't want one person being the exemplar of what Barbados is. One person seeming to have that power to be able to determine the future. It should not be so at all. And the party system, I think that we have reached the stage, quite frankly, that we have to be very careful, because we never want to end up as a one-party situation. And we don't want to be a multi-party situation. Quite frankly, the two-party system has very good advantages. So I think one of the things I will have to say to the Democratic Labour Party is that they hold the future of Barbados in their hands. We have to make sure that we build up this party to the way that everybody had it. And I'm here not here to blame anybody or into anything. But I'm saying that sometimes we go through these very rough periods. And that is natural in life. But you're a historian, so I know that you get these slumps and the rises in history. We have gone through it. We have now to rise out of it. And we have to be able to bring us back to a solid two-party democracy. That's very important, a two-party democracy. But right now, I think that we have to strategize within our party how we get back to the position that we were at, and to examine why we went where we are, and to move over that. Not looking back and regretting that sort of thing, because that's history. History, I've learned, is that you don't deal with the past as though it's something that you have to be sad about. You recognize it. But when you get past those kind of things, you plan out what is my future. And I'm saying to you that the two-party democracy is so fundamental that the Democratic Labour Party has to understand what its role is. The people will expect this Democratic Labour Party, not any of those fledgling parties that are knocking around and so on, not fly-by-night parties and so on. They're expecting us to organize ourselves. And I'm saying to you that from my perspective, I'm happy that the gentleman who is leading us is doing the work that he has to do. And I believe it is all hands on deck. And once we get ourselves organized, prepare for the next election, and move forward, that we'll be able to bring back Barbados to where it should be, because without a two-party democracy, our country is going to suffer, and suffer seriously. So I pause at that point for further comments.
I noticed that you raised the concern about democracy and the way it seems to go in places that are republics. And I want to hear from the other two guests, something that you raised. You said, you know, what do we want Barbados to look like? What do we want our constitution to look like to reflect this republican status? Because if you go outside the door and ask anybody walking on the street, you know, what do you want Barbados to look like as a republic? Very few people can articulate what it is, because there has not been that preparation of the population for this move.
Yeah, I would, if I could just jump in. And I think Bobby made an important point when he said the other parties at the time fought a robara against independence, and obviously the Prime Minister found herself in a position where there was no person to challenge her in terms of this move. But I believe, and many persons within my age group believe, that the government owed the country a referendum. As in, if you don't have some person to oppose you in government, bring it to the people to find out if this is what the people of Barbados want, and give your citizens, the electorate, the opportunity to then determine what the republic should look like for us. So I definitely do feel to thrust upon the general populace now, what do you want the republic to look like? Is as if you have eaten, digested, and are regurgitating it back out, you know, to tell people, okay, well, it's gone down now, it hasn't gone down very well, so let's make the most of what we could. And for me, presently, I don't think a lot of people at least felt as if they had the opportunity to say whether or not it was something that we wanted. And because many people never had the opportunity to say what they wanted, then it's neither here nor there for them. So we can't define what the republic would look like, because technically the only thing or the only issue that people would have taken was, oh, you know, well, we're still under the care of the crown. You know, but what did that mean, pros and cons for us as a people? I don't think anyone could really determine at this point in time what that was.
I want to dovetail something on what Ms. Morris said. The move to republicanism, and I'll repeat what he said, we were at the hill. Essentially, on the face of it, the bills that were passed, for the most part, simply moved from a governor general to a president. There weren't any major structural changes, not with respect to our laws or the structure of governance. None of that structurally moved. So on November 30th, 2021, we got a president. And that is not a criticism, that's just trying to point out to Barbadians that there was no massive shift in terms of our governance, in terms of our separation of powers. Now, I use this word because what you must understand in the existing structure of Barbados is that there is a separation of powers, three arms of government. There is the executive, the head of which is the Prime Minister. There is the legislature, which is the House as well as the Senate. And then there is the judiciary. The interesting thing about our three arms of governance is that between the legislature and the administration, there is a sort of incestual relationship. That is to say that the Prime Minister, who is a sitting member of Parliament, she selects her cabinet from among the other members of Parliament. So your cabinet, which is your administration, is wholly made up of members of the legislature. So in truth and in fact, unlike the United States system, the cabinet and the legislature are one. So there is this relationship. What that practically means is that whatever the administration, the cabinet, the ones that are in charge of the ministries and in charge of the day-to-day governance of the country, whatever policies they want to institute through legislation will come to pass because they are part of the legislature and they will have the majority within the parliament. And that has been our system. Barbados has one of the, if not the most, the oldest parliamentary system within Western democracies, and that has been our system, and it has worked. But I will echo what Mr. Morris has said. It has worked because of two key reasons. One, there has always been a strong balance within the democracy, in that there was always a government, but there is always a strong opposition or a party waiting in government, of government in waiting, I beg your pardon, that often act as the check and the balance. They often act as the medium by which there was accountability. What has happened within our last 7 years, due to the electoral results of 2018, is that you've had a very one-sided government. So you had the two-party system under pressure, and then finally now, you have the exercise of power being something that we have rarely seen in Barbadian history, and I invite Mr. Morris to comment on this. And by that I mean is that you have a government and a Prime Minister directly whose exercise of power, I will go as far as to say, test the envelope of our democratic system. I'll give you an example. In 2022, when the result again of the election was 30-0 to the Barbados Labour Party, there was a debate as to the constitution of the Senate. And the Prime Minister proposed to put a member, to appoint a citizen to the Senate that was below the constitutional age at the time. And in so doing, it was her prerogative to conceptualize that. No problem there. However, in order to do that, the Prime Minister would have had to make a constitutional change at that time. But a constitutional change requires 2/3 majority in the House and 2/3 majority in the Senate. So you had this conundrum within the Constitution where the Senate had not been constituted, but yet the Prime Minister wanted to put a man in the Senate. So there was this testing of the prime ministerial powers beyond what the Constitution required. So I want to make sure I connect what Mr. Morris is saying with what is happening. Within now this type of Republican system, we are seeing that the exercise of prime ministerial powers are being tested. And that matter went to the court, which, remember what I said, is the third arm of government, for the court to say whether that can happen or not. In addition to what was happening at the time, you had a Prime Minister that, even though the Constitution provided for the opposition leader to appoint 2 senators, and the Constitution was very clear that if no such office existed, meaning if there was no opposition leader, it deferred the power to appoint those 2 senators to the President. And yet the Prime Minister again came to exercise powers to say, well, I will just give it to the party that got the most votes. But it was not hers to give, Mr. Morris. So I'm saying to kind of crystallize what Mr. Morris is saying, it's not hyperbole. You have within this system where traditionally the powers that are given to the Prime Minister are being pushed beyond the envelope. Let's see how much, like, if those of you who are parents, when children get 2 and they get 3, they start to test you to see what you can do, what they can do. You say, don't do this, and they test you. Don't touch that, and they test you. That is what's happening in our system at this point in time, where prime ministerial powers are being tested to see if the other arms of government are going to respond, or if the opposition is going to respond in order to curtail or to bring accountability to those powers. So when we ask the question of Barbadians, what do you want your republic state to look like? One of the questions we have to ask is, how do you want governmental powers to be exercised in this country? What are the institutions that you want to make sure stand strong, such that the people are still represented and that the interests of all the people, rich, the poor, the have-nots, all people are represented? Do you want to see a Republican system that still has accountability, where there's a strong opposition? Do you want to see a Republican system where maybe we do an absolute separation of the administration and the legislature? Do we want to see a Republican system which maybe we take away the power to appoint a Senate and maybe have an elected Senate, like is in the United States? So these are all questions that I think public discourse can be had, and maybe, as Dr. Armstrong pointed out, have the public weigh in, rather within public forums, or maybe even to the point of a referendum. But to have this system now, where a prime minister and her cabinet are cherry picking what the very commission has instituted, because the chairman of the commission has come out and said, this issue of the speaker, that was the minority opinion. We didn't put this forward as a majority. And while it is within the prime minister's prerogative, you have appointed a commission, and I assume that that commission was appointed because of their credentials, and you trust their credentials. And those combined credentials has come to you and said, listen, this is what we think you should do. And then you disregard what they say and move forward with what you think anyway. Those are some issues that maybe the public needs to weigh in and have their own say with respect to changes within our Republican system.
Sure, with respect to you, I'd like again to ask Ms. Greenidge to guide me on this one. I am of the distinct impression that just as the cabinet and the legislature work together, that the prime minister has control over the judiciary. She selects the chief justice, and she selects the judges. And it seems to me that that gives the prime minister, and they're not making an individual thing, but once that system exists, it means that the prime minister, whoever that prime minister, has overarching power. Overarching power. And it is even worse then where you have a system where the political situation is as they're in Barbados, where one party is not able to give the kind of support for an alternative system, where the Democratic Labour Party is no longer able to support that group of people that it had built up a membership, and not only a membership, but an attachment, supporters, and so on, so that the party in power, because of its authoritative approach to business, can control everything. And therefore, that is no longer democracy as we understand it. We have to be very clear about that. And that is why I say that sometimes when I look at the situation, I remember when I was in Caribbean history class with late Charles Watson, myself, and Francis Short. We did those courses together. Latin American Caribbean history. And we were looking at Latin American leadership. And we had decided a and I've been taught and understood that the Latin American leader was becoming what we call a caudillo, a big chief, a jefe chief. And he controlled everything around him. It is like the Maduro type or the Chavez type and so on. And I have always felt that I was in a reflection in the Caribbean, and I speak my mind on these things. I'm saying a reflection in the Caribbean and Ralph Gonzalez's behavior. And what we can see is that a powerful electorate can bring that in. That is why you still have to have your trust in democracy. Because there's that tendency sometimes that the electorate can give somebody the power by giving them 3 terms and 4 terms, etc. But the same electorate can take them down and put them in their place. But that means, quite frankly, that we have to educate the electorate in terms of the power of the vote to control leadership that can go astray. And I think that that cordial type of leadership, that kind of leadership that one person who sort of is identified with the entire country, that one person that appears to be bigger than the country basically, that one person that projects an image of control, I think that is not what Barbados is about at all. I did not say it in everybody. There were some such tendencies in terms of Barbadian demand you looked at. But I don't think that's the same thing that I'm saying now, quite frankly, in the present leadership. Sandy was not there. Onyo was not there, quite frankly. If I look at all the leaders, Tom was not there either. All of them had some strength. But I'm saying the caudillo type developing now, the Latin American type of leader who sees himself as the number one, and that number one can control everything. And I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about that because one of the things that I really felt was quite abhorrent was that in the middle of COVID, an election was held with the clear understanding that anybody who studies electoral politics in Barbados know that once there's a low poll, the Barbados Labour Party wins. If you get a poll about 62% turnover, people coming out, Dems will win. It is when the Dems stay home and there's a lower poll that the Barbados Labour Party will win. So here was a gift to her from COVID. And he went in and held the election during that time. Not really caring about who came from ill or whatever. You would have lost some lives at that time. They're coming out through COVID and so on. So, but Barbadians don't see these things.
But how can we make them see these things?
By education. By holding discussions like the one that we're having. But remember, there aren't many people who are willing to be as open as we are. Quite frankly, there are a lot of people who keep quiet in Barbados. They don't want to mash corns. They don't want to be the person saying it. They're always looking for somebody else to say it. But the somebody else is not going to say it. Because the somebody else might be looking for something. I might hear them looking for nothing.
Are the people
I'm looking for nothing. And therefore I am able to say things. My bright young colleague beside me is looking for what he can contribute to this country. And he knows that he only has that opportunity if the country survives. So that's why he's in this business. I'm on the other side. I'm at the side where I don't need anything. All I want is peace of mind. And that peace of mind is seeing the Democratic Labour Party return to that position where it brings the balance to our society that it cannot do right now. And I am committed in any way that I can help to do that. And I know that one of the ways of doing it, for those people who don't have pocket bags of money, is by using their skills and their effort to help people and to deal with the mind, to speak to the mind, to go out there and speak to people so that they understand in their own language, in the language of the streets, in Bajan terms, what we are saying. And we're saying that the caudillo type of person might be suited for Latin America and those places, but it's not suited for Barbados. The model that we want goes back to the men like Earl Barrow. Earl was powerful, but he was modest. Earl was down to earth. He moved among the people. He felt that he belonged to those people. I know that. I know the man. I spent time with the man, and one of those people who's still alive, who spent time with him. He, myself and Leroy McLean chaired the 1986 meeting in Mary Emma's speech. Or I had one in Christchurch, and Earl was very close to that. Earl used to be in my office in and out. And I developed a close attachment to him, and he loved Leroy McLean. He said on that platform that he expected Leroy at some time to run in his place, basically. And he talked about how Leroy's family was moved by gerrymandering. The whole family and the whole village moved by gerrymandering by Tom Adams, out of St. John into St. Thomas. So people do not understand how those maximum leaders have operated. They have done things that would put themselves in very strong positions on the clear recognition that a lot of people won't notice it because they're not politically savvy. And even when they notice it, they don't want to talk about it. So I'm thinking that we need to develop alertness, and we have to have an openness in terms of what we see.
I think you are sort of scaring thinkers in this country when you talk about the caudillo type of leader that you seem to be saying has emerged. And I think that that is clearly what has happened here in Barbados. If you looked at the current leadership and the power of the Prime Minister, I'm not speaking about this Prime Minister, I'm talking about the title, the office, the power of the Prime Minister. How can we, going on the road to Republican status, limit the power of the Prime Minister? Because I have a friend who's been saying to me for years, the Prime Minister, a Prime Minister is like a god. That is what he says to me. How can we? Is it something that they have looked at in this Constitutional Review Commission? Don, who wants to take that?
I will take it first just to respond to a question from Mr. Morris with respect to the appointment of the judiciary. Now that has been a power that has been within the precincts of the Prime Minister, the office of the Prime Minister for all the Constitution, and the appointment is usually under the advice of the Prime Minister with consultation from the opposition leader, which is part and parcel of our system. As an officer of the court myself, I repose confidence in the independence of the judiciary, that the judiciary operates as the guardrails of the Constitution. And that is borne out within our administrative law legislation. And by that I mean, within the Constitution, there are the Bill of Rights. And if myself as a citizen, or citizen shop owner, or citizen businessman, or citizen fish vendor, any citizen of Barbados whose rights have been infringed by an action of government can go to the law courts, can go to the judiciary, and have that decision of the government reviewed to the extent that they can protect the rights of every citizen. So while the Prime Minister has the power to recommend the judiciary, the judges that sit on the judiciary, I repose confidence within the independence of our judiciary. That said, I just want to say one other thing from Ms. Morris's contribution. The exercise of the power of the Prime Minister, and this is also to answer Chair's question, is something that it is within the office of the Prime Minister. And oftentimes, sadly to say, it comes down to who holds that office. Mr. Morris referenced the calling of the election in 2022. For full disclosure, I was a member of the Electoral and Boundaries Commission. At the time, I was one of the commissioners, 5 commissioners, appointed then by the then opposition leader, who at the time was Bishop Joseph Averly. That was just shy of 3.5 years into the term of the now Prime Minister. And she sought to call the election. Now, we all know, Barbadians know, and we've come to appreciate that a Prime Minister has the power to call an election. Fun fact, and when I actually was in the constituency last week, and I happened to be in a rum shop and just chatting with constituents and voters, and we happened upon this topic. And I said to them, I said, do you know that there is only one other time in our history, our post-independence history, within the 60 years of independence, that an election was snapped in Barbados? They said, no. I said, yes. There's only one other time, and that was in 1994, when Erskine Sandiford faced a no confidence motion, which means that you had a crisis of governance, and you had no choice but to dissolve Parliament. So Mr. Sandiford went up to the then Governor General and say, I do not have the confidence of my MPs any longer, and therefore you have to dissolve Parliament. And that is part and parcel of the system. For a Prime Minister then to snap an election, I have done the research, Mr. Morris. I have searched all of the Caribbean. I have searched the English system. It is usually for some grave reason. For example, to the audience that are with us, in 2001 in Trinidad, there was a 15-15, a hung parliament, which means both the opposition and the government had the same amount of seats, which means that governance would have been hampered at that time. So within a year of that election, they had to snap a new election so that they can go back to the electorate and be able to get a mandate to govern. None of those things existed in Barbados in 2022. And the question begs, why would a Prime Minister, therefore, in the middle of a pandemic, with over 6,000 Barbadians quarantined because of the emergency powers, would call an election? Simply because she can. And this is where we struggle, Chair. Are prime ministerial powers now being exercised simply because you can, and the interests of the people be down? And that, in my opinion, that's my personal opinion, and having sat within the bowels of that apparatus at the time, being within the Electoral and Boundaries Commission, my opinion is that it simply was for the aggrandizement of one leader and for the political advantage of one party. It made no sense. It gave no account to the 6,000 voters that would have been disenfranchised. So it comes down then, Chair, it is not whether we can restrict the exercise of prime ministerial power, because Prime Minister will have power. I think the question to our electorate is, do we elect leaders that we can trust will exercise that power to the benefit of the people and not to the benefit of themselves?
We're running out of time, so, and we can go on. So you go ahead.
Okay, Chair. That brings me back to another incident, a similar incident, sort of opposite to that, with Fandel Short, when in fact he went down longer before he called an election, and that caused furor on the other side. What was he holding on for? And then I did get the chance to ask Mr. Short, well, why were you holding on? Because after the election, quite frankly, we had a general meeting, I think it was at Queen's Park. And he said to me, he had promised, as Prime Minister, to the people in all the housing areas, that he was going to repair those housing areas. He was going to change the electrical wiring. He was going to look at giving them the opportunity to purchase the houses that they were in. And he wanted time in order to do that before he called the election. And I said to him, but you could have told Barbados that. I'm hearing it now after the election. Why didn't you tell Barbados that you were holding back the election, not because you had any kind of notion that you were the one and only powerful man in Barbados or anything like that, or not for anything for your own private advantage, but you wanted to see housing areas in Barbados transferred it. And you know, I have not heard a word about if that process went forward, if in fact the housing areas were repaired, and whether any decision was it, and I'm hearing everybody saying no, nothing has happened.
Many owners are without
Transferring those houses then to the people who live in them. And those houses were built in the 1940s. Those houses were built way back in the 1940s, so they would have problems in terms of structure and etc. And I believe that Barbados has a responsibility for people who live in that kind of public housing to make sure that we can do as much as possible for them. And it's not surprising to me that in those areas that you're getting some people who are getting a little restive and troublesome, etc. And we therefore have to do some analysis about whether that has to do with perhaps some of those things they've been renting all their lives and paying to government, and they're not getting the conditions changed, etc. I believe the Democratic Labour Party has to look at the housing area situation very seriously in terms of a policy to see how we can improve the situation for them. I think it will fall to us, quite frankly, to come up with new opportunities for people in those areas, even if we have to move them out. If they become infested and they become dangerous spots, etc., you might have to decide on a policy of that kind of housing, and take people and put them in different places and so on, relocate them and so on, because I do not like the notion that the point has a reputation, this as a place has a reputation and so on, and you think it is coming basically from where they're living, because I believe they are human beings like all of us, and that we, all of us, are the circumstances of where we live, or opportunities to move from where we were, because most of us started poor, and that's a fact. Most of us started like the people in the plain, but we are not still there, and our children and grandchildren will not be there because we are propelling them by the steam that we got sometimes from free secondary education, etc. Not something that we did on our own either, because of that gift that everybody gave us, free secondary education. So I believe that one of the things that the Democratic Party has to do is to own areas that you find, own them, and make the changes that are necessary in order to take people out of that continuing situation that comes with reputational damage to them from just being living there. I believe that kind of reconstruction is sometimes very, very necessary. You do not have to keep something that is there because you found it there. You don't have to do that. I believe once the Democratic Party understand that its mission is a mission of change for poor people. Its mission is upliftment. And don't tell me about the money. Find the money. If that's what I'm saying, there's no way that we can allow our national insurance scheme to fall down. Find the money. All of those areas we must find money, because we are democratic socialists. And we must make that mean something for each and everybody in Barbados. Democratic socialists mean that we're going to look at the bottom, and we're going to do what we have to do to lift them. And we don't want a triangle anymore. We want something that has this kind of shape, you know? Not a triangle. There's some people at the bottom and a few at the top. We have to move that. We have to move it.
Okay, I know we are absolutely out of time now, but I will give each person 30 seconds to your parting comments. I'll start with you, Mr. Greenidge.
Certainly. Thank you so much. And thank you for having us here today to discuss this. I think we will have plenty more discussions to come. My 20 seconds now is to say I am excited to see the road that Barbados will take. even as a republic. And I say excited because I believe in Barbados. That's why I am here. That's why I'm sure Dr. Armstrong is here presenting ourselves as candidates to see Barbados on a path to prosperity, to see Barbados on a path where we flourish, and to see Barbados on a path where we continue to govern ourselves in a way that all Barbadians can prosper, that all Barbadians can benefit.
Thank you. I'll go to Dr. Armstrong and then come to you for the final comment.
I think what I'll say is that on the back of the discussion, I remember when our public libraries function to capacity. I would love to see more of that, and where that can't be facilitated, mobile libraries driving into communities and informing and educating our children about the path that we have taken to get where we are. I think the Democratic Labour Party owes that to the public at this point in time.
Mm-hmm. And your final comment.
My honor is to be between these two. Yeah, but at my age, it is good to sit around young people and to hear them, because this is the future. This is the future, and I hope that the Democratic Labour Party will embrace the future. I hope that they will put a lot of confidence in the young people. I am hearing wisdom coming from the children, to tell the truth, and experience, although they're young. So we have to put that kind of trust in our people, and I hope that we give our young people the opportunity, as much as possible, to have occasions for them to come together and discuss things. That must be a very fundamental thing in terms of how we run our party at branch level, whatever. Bring these people together very, very often so that they can talk. Make sure that they help each other. Don't stay in your constituency, but go out and work with somebody else. I have learned myself from listening to the two. So I thank you too.
Certainly,
And I thank you all also for allowing me to be here. Thank you, my friend.
Well, that brings the end of our discussion, and thank you so much for watching and listening. We are here very excited. This is our independence anniversary, so go out and enjoy and remember the builders of Barbados. Good afternoon.
Hear me now. If I hear a barrow could talk today, I got something to say. Why? Raise your flag, but open your eyes. Yeah. If I hear a barrow had to speak today, what I see would